You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof, the smoking gun. It could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property under laws they had no part in making.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Ansel.
This is episode 294 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. To start off with on today's show, I'll be talking Russiagate and the allegations against Michael Flynn. More news on kind of the big international story right now, and that's the announcement of the U.S. troop withdrawal from Syria. So, pieces are moving on the ground over there as you have a world superpower that's going to be leaving a power vacuum in areas of Syria. And of course, more news here about the politics behind the withdrawal and what all the different U.S. officials are saying. And of course, Bolton is trying to ruin it. So we got to talk about that. And then some news on Somalia, Israel, and Afghanistan. For those of you who could take the minute to do it, I do really appreciate it when you could share the show. LibertarianInstitute.org is the best place to find all my work. My daily news roundup and the show are on the homepage there. And if you really want to support the show, think about checking out my Patreon account. You get access to the bonus content that I produce if you donate a little bit of money to me at patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus. All right, so the first story I have here is about Michael Flynn. And Flynn has been accused as one of the central figures in the Russiagate conspiracy theory. Somehow I believe he is supposed to be one of the connections between the United States and the Russia government that helped Putin and Trump conspire together to steal the election from Hillary Clinton. Now, the allegations that he had a call with, I believe it was the Russian ambassador, and tried to get the Russian ambassador had something on Michael Flynn. That call was actually made on the behalf of the Israeli government, trying to undermine a Barack Obama decision to not veto a UN Security Council resolution that was going to condemn Israel. So that was actually, Michael Flynn acting on behalf of Israel. When you look at the allegations that he was a foreign agent, an unregistered foreign agent, yeah, he was being paid by a foreign government and didn't register according to the laws as he should have in the United States. But in that case, it was Turkey who was paying him, not Russia. And in this case, the accusation is that as a member of the Trump team, Michael Flynn traveled to Russia in 2015. I think had an interview on RT and a dinner where I believe Vladimir Putin was attended. And the claim has been that, this is in some way facilitating the relationship between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. In reality, what we now know is that Michael Flynn contacted the DIA before traveling to Russia and met with them, kind of let U.S. intelligence know what was going on. He was briefed before and after here. And so, I guess he kind of said what he discussed with Russian officials and everything. And so this is in no way anything that isn't commonplace among world politics for leaders of different countries and important people in different countries to travel to other countries and talk to their leadership and, to talk to your government before you do so, your intelligence services and all that. So Flynn seems to have crossed his T's and dotted his I's on that trip, and there's no reason to suspect anything came from it. He let the U.S. intelligence know they are aware of it. Now, the other detail here is that, this has been information that was known for a long time, and Senator Chuck Grassley has been advocating that this information be made public, saying that, this is kind of another temple of the Russiagate conspiracy theory, is you have all these accusations, Michael Flynn, Paul Manafort, Jeff Sessions, Carter Page, George Papadopoulos, whoever it is, has all these ties to the Russian government. And, there's always these 4 or 5 different events, whether it's the Trump Tower meeting, Flynn's trip to Russia, his phone call with the Russian ambassador, that turned out not to actually be the Trump administration conspiring with Russia, but other different things going on. Certainly some of them crimes, or at least by, kind of the letter of the U.S. law. I'm not trying to say that Michael Flynn has done nothing wrong here, just that none of it proves the Russiagate conspiracy theory. And I think this is representative of it overall, is that you have all these claims, but, as the information comes out, and unfortunately some of this information hasn't come out till years later, this event happened in 2015, and the Russiagate thing's been going on for 2.5 years, so there's been plenty of time. for this information that should have been released earlier to come out and kind of dismiss the claims, but we had to wait this long. This other Russiagate story, I think, is less important to, debunking any central claims, but we now have court records that show that was an associate of John McCain. I believe the guy runs the John McCain Institute. That was the one who leaked the Trump dossier, the Steele one that accused Trump of doing a whole bunch of salacious things, including, I think, peeing on a bed or something weird like that. Many of these claims, there's no proof of them whatsoever. Trump wasn't in the city he was alleged to have been at the time. I do believe there's some events in here who have actually turned out to be true, but none of them are, criminal or proof that Trump colluded with Russia in the 2016 election. That it came from John McCain, or would, I think at this point indicate that it came from John McCain, I think just shows how, far his own political party was trying to go, in the run up to 2016 and after the election to try to undermine him. I also think there's a discussion that we could have here, and maybe I'll have Will Porter on in the future and ask him this. If BuzzFeed maybe, shouldn't have allowed this leak to be anonymous. You have a man here who's tied with the, very prominent U.S. senator who's very anti-Donald Trump, giving you a dossier on Donald Trump, but a lot of the allegations in the dossier are unfounded. And so, this could have, was a political move, and I think quite obviously so. And so maybe BuzzFeed should have said, well, if you want us to publish this, since, the conclusions drawn here are very much in doubt, we're going to have, require that you allow us to use your name. So very unfortunate there, but now that we know, we finally know how the Steele Dossier became public here. I haven't seen many updates in the Paul Whelan arrest. I would have expected that more would have happened over the weekend here, but from what we know now, Paul Whelan has access to, U.S. representatives or ambassadors of some kind, but remains jailed in Russia. We now have a Russian citizen that was arrested by the FBI in a U.S.-administered Pacific island and is now detained in Florida. People are speculating that this is a result, kind of a move against Russia by the United States, a result of the Paul Whelan arrest. Not sure if that's the case. I mean, the FBI is a big organization, and so it's, very possible that these guys were conducting a criminal investigation. The Russian arrested does have a criminal past with, I don't know about smuggling U.S. Made like thermal sniper scopes and selling them in Russia, or just kind of doing it without the proper licensing. And I don't know, smuggling would be the right word then. But certainly, he was known to U.S. authorities and was already accused of being guilty of a crime in the United States. And so, if you had this guy travel to a Pacific Island, maybe, a couple ambitious FBI agents just took advantage of the situation, not realizing the broader political implications here. However, we've seen recently in the news, when it comes to like the arrest of the Chinese tech executive and then subsequent arrests of Canadian citizens in China, that, this is something that's happening in the international stage right now, certainly suggests that that's what's going on here. In Israel, I saw this very interesting headline that Israeli police forces were clashing with settlers in the West Bank. And so, you go in to read the story and find out here that you had a settlement that was Palestinian-owned land, and then the settlers came in and stole the land and built houses and, took the houses or built houses on top of it. And then an Israeli court ordered that they had to vacate the land and said, nah, you just stole this and that's inappropriate. Now, what all my listeners to the show know is that Israeli courts are not biased in favor of the Palestinians. They very much protect the settlers and rule in favor of them. And, with the new nation state law in Israel, we really see that I think Israeli state now views itself as a, Jewish state, and it's meant for the Jewish people. And at that point, you would expect Palestinians to get very favorable ruling in the courts, but you had one here. And so I guess the police were there to evict some of these settlers, and there were some protesters there that threw rocks at the Israeli soldiers. Now, again, people who have listened to my show in the past, here, if a rock came at an Israeli soldier, you better bet that there was bullets flying in the other direction. But that wasn't the case here. When you look at the casualty report from after these protests, you had 23 Israeli police officers injured and only 3 Palestinian settlers injured. Now you probably have more arrested, but only 3 injured. I just want to take a second and reflect here and look at, the return march protests where you have well over 100 Palestinians killed by Israeli soldiers, and many of them were, throwing rocks at a wall where there were, kind of fortified Israeli positions with sniper rifles on the other side of it. And these people, were all gunned down and routinely shot with live ammunition in their limbs and stuff like that. And here you had a case where 23 Israeli police officers were injured and only 3 settlers. Just the disparity is telling on how the Israeli police differently treat the Jewish people versus the Palestinian people. Quick update on the Khashoggi murder here. We now have Saudi Arabia carrying out a trial within Saudi Arabia of the people alleged to have murdered Jamal Khashoggi. Who knows how much of a dog and pony show this is and how much justice is actually going to be handed out here. But Saudi Arabia, who has a pretty liberal use of the death penalty, is saying that they're pursuing death penalty charges against 5 members of the group of people alleged to murder Jamal Khashoggi. In Afghanistan, I want to mark this because it was, I think, a very interesting piece in Reuters saying that the Taliban are now in position to threaten some pretty significant oil fields in northern Afghanistan. And again, I just think this is another kind of roadmap sign, as we go along here in the Afghan war, to show how poorly it's going for the United States now, that they're not even able to secure these major Afghan oil fields at this point. And then again, another 7 killed this time in Kandahar by Taliban attack on checkpoint. Those are 7 Afghan security forces that were killed. All right, Syria, a lot of stuff going on here. The first thing I want to mention, and this is just mostly a follow-up from the last show where I was discussing how as we go into 2019 and you look at what's going on in Iraq and Syria, you now have an Iraqi government, which is still heavily backed by the United States, but I think is looking to move further from the U.S. orbit, which will now be, a natural ally and probably pretty close with the Assad government in Syria. And we see, more indication of this by Assad giving the Iraqi government authorization to carry out attacks in Syria against ISIS without pre-approval. And so this has been something that the Syrian government hasn't allowed the United States or Turkey to do, but is now allowing Iraq to do. It's also, worth noting that that Iraq has carried out some strikes in Syria before, but, giving the pre-authorization only happens after the United States announces their withdrawal and supposedly the end of their, kind of air campaign in Syria as well. This is also some news that is kind of independent of the U.S. troop withdrawal here, but you have some fighting going on in northern Syria. The Idlib and Aleppo provinces are mostly controlled by Syrian rebel groups. However, there's factions here. So there's rebels that are controlled more or less by Turkey, and most of those groups are the more moderate types. Now, I don't mean like election moderate, just not jihadist. And then you have the jihadist Al-Qaeda linked groups, the people loyal to Jilani. Well, Turkey was looking, of course, to either invade or threaten to invade the Kurdish-held areas of Syria and moved and massed a lot of forces along the borders of Syrian Kurdistan. And that meant that it weakened their positions that they held around the Idlib and Aleppo provinces. And so the Al-Qaeda linked groups have now taken advantage of this and started to take some territories and towns from the more moderate groups there. Now, as far as the U.S. troop withdrawal goes, I haven't seen any firm indication that U.S. troops have withdrawn from anywhere yet. That all U.S. troops are still where they planned to be before. As I talked about in the last show, it looks like the troop withdrawal is going to occur over about 4 months rather than the number that was first floated about 100 or about 30 days. So, 90 days longer now. All right, so he has some comments given by National Security Advisor John Bolton saying that the U.S. withdrawal from Syria is going to protect the Syrian Kurds and also prevent ISIS from gaining any territory, and that these are conditions. And so I guess if we can't protect the Syrian Kurds, it sounds like according to this Bolton statement, that means we won't withdraw. Now, I'm not sure if that's how this is actually going to play out. As I talked about on the last show, and I believe the show before that as well, one of the ways one of the things I think we learned from Syria is that the Trump administration officials may not always be saying policy that reflects actually what's going to happen with Donald Trump. Administration officials made it sound like the United States wasn't going to leave until there was an enduring defeat of ISIS in Syria, whatever that means, and until Iran left Syria. And here we have Trump saying that, nope, the U.S. policy is still, like I said at the very beginning, we're leaving Syria once ISIS is defeated. And so it may still be that the U.S. will leave Syria within 120 days, whether the Kurds are protected or not, or whether ISIS will be able to pick up a little town because of the U.S. withdrawal. We're out in 120 days. Bolton also reiterated the U.S. red line in Syria, saying that there would be severe consequences if Assad used chemical weapons. I'm not sure if this means another attack against Assad or what, but in the past, the U.S. officials making this statement has at least had rebels make up claims that, the white helmets and their Proxy propaganda force there will put out a claim saying that the Assad government is using chemical weapons. We know with the Al-Qaeda bad forces taking more territory in northern Syria, it means that there may be more conflict with the Russian or Assad guys, because the Al-Qaeda linked rebel groups in northern Syria are the ones saying that, they're not upholding this ceasefire conditions with the Assad and the Russians and the Iranian. And so it could just be a bad set of conditions here where you have a rising influence of Al-Qaeda in the region, and then, John Bolton giving them a dog whistle to carry out at least completely made up or propagandized chemical weapons attack, but maybe even a false flag. The U.S. does seem to have made some progress with our Kurdish bad forces on the ground there against ISIS in the Euphrates River. With those victory, 2 Americans were captured, and so this is also always something that we need to pay attention to. Donald Trump in the past has expressed interest in sending more people to Guantanamo Bay, and so we don't want while everything else is going on at home with the government shutdown and the building the wall and everybody paying attention to, what these new freshman Congress people are saying and doing, Trump might just send a couple Americans to Guantanamo Bay without everybody paying attention. There's also some talks going on now. Russia, I guess, had some mediated talks between Assad and the Kurds, so that's a good step forward because I guess what you're going to see if the U.S. is looking to set up a protective situation for the Kurds as they withdraw from Syria. That means handing the territory over to the Syrian government, who wouldn't allow the Turkish government to invade Syrian government-held territory, while the Syrian Kurds may have a harder time preventing the Turkish government from coming in and killing them. There's also talks going on between the U.S. and Russia, so hopefully this would also help facilitate that transfer of power from kind of U.S. and Kurdish-backed forces to Syrian-backed or Syrian government, Russian, and probably still some Kurdish forces in there as well. There's a great article by Mark Perry that I'm going to link to in the show notes page. You should definitely take the time to read it in Foreign Policy Magazine. And basically Perry goes through and says that this has been what's going on now in Syria with the withdrawal, the U.S. policy for months. U.S. officials had known about it. This didn't come as a surprise to everyone. And that this was a surprise and shocking move was just spin put out by kind of the Washington policy, foreign policy think tank types and the media and the blob, the swamp, whatever you want to call it, all went out and said that this was a surprise to help kind of hopefully turn public opinion against this move. Making Trump seem like an irrational kind of crazed man who in 1 second we're staying in Syria for a long time to make sure Iran goes to now, we're going to leave because we defeated ISIS like he had said all along. In that article as well, there's an interesting kind of paragraph there where Mark Perry points out, and I think has a quote from a U.S. military personnel in Syria, that the Syrian Kurds weren't all that vital to the U.S. success in Syria. And so, I think this is probably more true than most people realize, and that the Kurds haven't been all that effective or helpful. And, if we look here in the amount of time that it's taken to get rid of the remaining of Islamic State down near the Iraqi border between Iraq and Syria and along the Euphrates River there, it's been well over 6 months now to defeat this final Islamic State cell. It appears that maybe the Kurds just aren't all that interested in taking it, are much more concerned with Kurdish territory in the northern half of eastern Syria. All right, that's what we wrap up the show for today. Sorry, I feel a little under the weather, sneezing a lot, so I'll go back through and edit and make sure that none of those got into the audio chat there. But that does mean that it may be cut up and picked up weird, some kind of like little editing glitches there. So if it sounds a little bit more clunky today, hopefully I will be better and then the audio will be better by the next show. But a lot of important things going on in the world, and I definitely want to put out a show today. That also means I'm going to save the Somalia stuff for next time. And just real quick, if everybody could take the time to share the show, I appreciate it. foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, libertarianinstitute.org. Check out my news website, immersionnews.com. I'm on minds.com at Immersion News. Minds is a great crypto social network site. If you're tired of Facebook or, Twitter and the rest of the crap, check it out. And then, if you really want the show and the bonus content, patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus.